What's happening up there is a disgrace. It's a disgrace. Billions of dollars have been stolen, billions sent back to Somalia. A shocking courtroom decision in Minnesota is now raising serious questions about justice and accountability in the U.S. In a move experts say almost never happens, a judge overturned a unanimous jury verdict in a massive $7.2 million Medicaid fraud case. 4 a.m. Minnesota, a courthouse in darkness. A verdict erased from the record. Heroin moving through warehouse corridors. Fentanyl staged before dawn. Cash withdrawals timed to transport routes. What looked like a Medicaid fraud case was a narcotics corridor hidden inside a legal system that hesitated. Let me show you. It began as one of the most airtight fraud prosecutions Minnesota had seen in years. 14 months of financial tracing, 6,700 Medicaid billing records, and more than $9 for million in suspicious reimbursements tied to a network of home care businesses that barely existed on paper. Prosecutors walked into court confident. The jury walked out even more certain. 12 members, zero hesitation. A unanimous guilty verdict delivered in less than 5 hours, and then it disappeared. 3 months later, Judge Evelyn Hart issued a ruling that stunned everyone inside the courthouse. She didn't claim the fraud never happened. In fact, she wrote that the spending patterns, cash withdrawals, and luxury assets were deeply troubling. But she overturned the conviction anyway, arguing that the state hadn't ruled out the possibility that someone else inside the organization orchestrated the scheme. In one motion, the verdict collapsed. What was supposed to be a clean victory for accountability, instead, exposed something far more dangerous, a system where even the most obvious case could vanish the moment it reached the bench. If you think this verdict should never have disappeared, comment yes and tap like, so this investigation reaches more people. Long before the verdict collapsed, federal analysts noticed something that didn't fit the profile of a routine Medicaid fraud case. The businesses at the center of the investigation didn't behave like failing clinics trying to survive. They behaved like transit points. 3 separate home care companies shared the same Central Avenue registration address, but none maintained a physical office. Phone numbers were recycled. Employee rosters overlapped, and in a span of 11 months, more than $2, $1 million quietly moved out of Minnesota through a chain of regional transfers that stopped just short of international reporting thresholds. The timing raised even more questions. 418 cash withdrawals were processed between 1 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. across multiple branches in precise amounts, never high enough to trigger automatic review, but always large enough to drain accounts before business hours. Each transaction was followed by the same pattern: a temporary balance reset, a rapid infusion of new Medicaid reimbursements, then another withdrawal sequence days later. When investigators overlaid the transaction timeline with port of entry logistics data and warehouse rental records across Wisconsin and Illinois, the alignment was impossible to ignore. The same dates that saw peak withdrawal activity also matched transport manifests tied to medical supply shipments routed through secondary storage hubs. And for the first time, federal analysts stopped asking how the fraud worked and started asking what exactly the money was clearing the way for. The turning point came when federal analysts stopped treating the transactions as evidence and started treating them as coordinates. They patterns that didn't add up reconstructed 11 months of outbound transfers, warehouse lease agreements, and third-party contractor invoices, layering every timestamp onto a single operations map. What emerged wasn't random movement or fragmented accounting. It was a route, a clean repeating line stretching from Minneapolis into rural Wisconsin, then bending south toward 2 storage hubs in northern Illinois that hadn't appeared anywhere in the Medicaid files. Within 72 hours, task force units were on the ground. The first site looked ordinary enough: a low, windowless warehouse tucked behind a grain distribution yard, the kind of place few people would ever notice. But inside, investigators found something that no Medicaid case was supposed to lead to: reinforced modular crates, false floor plates, odor seal liners, and shrink-wrap containers labeled as youth rehabilitation medical kits. There were 612 crates in total. Only 9 contained medical supplies. The rest were empty or had residue traces that immediately triggered narcotics alerts. Across all three facilities, forensic teams documented a storage capacity consistent with multi-ton-on shipment rotation, the kind used to stage cargo for short-window cross-state dispatch. Transport logs were written by the same two subcontractors. Departure windows matched the early morning withdrawal cycles from Chapter 2 within minutes. And in one of the Illinois hubs, investigators recovered 17 sealed drums hidden behind a false partition, each bearing a serial code tied to a logistics broker already flagged in an unrelated DA inquiry. Lab testing confirmed it within hours. Fentanyl high-purity bulk stage. The estimate stunned the room. Analysts projected that over a 2-year cycle, the network could have processed the equivalent of 2 tons of narcotics through those staging points alone. This was no longer a fraud inquiry. It was a corridor disguised as compliance. At 4:18 a.m., Federal Command authorized a coordinated sweep, 3 simultaneous entry operations, highway choke points activated, carrier vehicles immobilized before dawn traffic could disperse. Agencies $38 million in logistics assets, encrypted manifests, and handheld inventory scanners that revealed something even more unsettling. Outbound shipments had been cataloged under philanthropic and healthcare export codes, allowing them to move through inspection lanes with minimal scrutiny. The money hadn't merely been stolen, it had paved a path. And for the first time since the verdict vanished, investigators understood why the financial pattern felt deliberate. It wasn't supporting a lifestyle or a shell company or even a fraud scheme trying to stay alive. It was clearing the way for something far larger and far more organized than anyone inside the courthouse had ever imagined. 612 crates. 2 tons projected, a corridor disguised as compliance. If you believe this was never just fraud, comment network tap-like, so the next chapter reaches more viewers. What investigators uncovered inside the warehouses didn't close the story, it widened it. The crates, manifests, and encrypted inventory logs didn't belong to a single business. They belonged to a lattice of entities that had been built, layered, and rotated over time. A system designed not merely to move money or goods, but to ensure that no single failure point could expose the whole operation. When forensic accountants pulled the registration history of the companies tied to the Medicaid reimbursements, they found that none of them were truly independent. 11 business entities spread across 6 legal owners were incorporated within a 32-month window, each one tied to a different sector on paper. Youth Services Consulting, Elder Home Care Support, International Relief for Discovery, No One Expected Coordination, Medical Logistics Contracting, all separate, all clean, all sharing the same financial spine. Behind the corporate filings were 53 bank accounts arranged in rotation. Funds never stayed still. Reimbursements flowed into primary accounts, dispersed into layered subaccounts, then resurfaced weeks later as vendor payments, charitable grants, or overseas program transfers. The numbers should have signaled instability. Yet, the movement was calm, measured, and uniform, like a machine executing a cycle. Over 4 years, analysts tracked more than $124 million moving to the network, not as profit as momentum. The structure became clearer when investigators overlaid the financial web onto the logistics map recovered during the raid. Every major transfer coincided with contract payments tied to temporary staffing, transport coordination, or youth outreach shipments. These weren't random expense labels. They acted as bridges, allowing significant capital to flow into freight schedules without triggering transactional suspicion. And then there was the timing. Every time one company filed reduced revenue statements or paused operations, another entity activated within weeks, inheriting vendors, contracts, and reimbursement eligibility. On paper, it looked like a struggling sector replenishing itself. In practice, it meant the operation never truly paused. It simply changed uniforms. When investigators questioned former employees, a pattern emerged. Most of them had never met the owners listed on corporate filings. Many worked remotely. Several